Want to win more games in 2025? Here are the top 3 best chess openings you need to know. Let's dive in. Number 3 is a counter to the most common king's pawn opening. As we enter the main line, white usually goes for an attack on your f7 pawn, aiming for the well-known fried liver attack. But here comes the Traxxler counterattack. I know a lot of you enjoy this variation, and for good reason. In the main line, after knight captures on f7, black achieves an impressive 57% win rate. Now just a quick note, the correct move for white is actually bishop captures on f7, but even then, the position remains complicated and not easy for white to handle. However, in most games, your opponents are going to play knight captures on f7, thinking they are forking half your army and about to win the game. That's when you hit them with the shocking counterblow. Bishop captures on f2. Again, the proper move for white is the counterintuitive king to f1, and even then, the position is still complex. But usually, your opponents will instinctively capture the bishop with their king, because it seems like the most natural thing to do. Then you play knight captures on f4, yet another counterattacking move. Wherever the king goes from there, it could be several different squares. Your next move is almost always queen to h4, putting tremendous pressure on white's position. And then, not only do you remove your queen from danger, so it can no longer be captured, but you also create a deadly counter threat. Queen to f2, delivering checkmate in one move. It's definitely not easy for white to defend against this, especially with the f-file wide open, giving you chances to bring your rook into play for a powerful follow-up attack. Plus, your other knight from c6 is always ready to jump into action, targeting key squares in white's position. That makes it very easy for white to overlook something and blunder. For example, right now you are threatening queen captures on f2, which is checkmate. If white tries to defend with pawn to g3, you can simply capture on g3, which is already strong enough. Or you could reroute your queen to f6, preparing to attack the white king from a different angle. After that, you can continue with queen to f2 check, followed by king to h3, and now comes a brilliant move. Pawn to d5, opening up the diagonal for your light-squared bishop to join the attack. At this point, white is basically lost. For example, if they try pawn to g4 to shield their king, you can reply with pawn to h5, aiming to open the diagonal and increase the pressure. On the next move, white has no real defense left. If they try bishop captures on d5, you can play pawn captures on g4. And that's a spectacular double check, a discovered check, and checkmate all at once. Of course, white could choose a different path, but this line clearly demonstrates how difficult it is for white to find the correct moves. Just one small mistake can spiral into complete devastation with no way back. The second most effective opening in our arsenal is what I like to call the rebellion opening, a sharp counter to the Italian game. It begins with the Russo gambit, where you push your pawn to f5 early on. In most cases, your opponents will see this aggressive push and instinctively capture on f5. But then you strike back with pawn to a4, launching your counterattack. This line gives you a 61% win rate, which is quite impressive at higher levels. What I really love about this opening is that all of white's natural-looking moves are actually wrong. That forces your opponent to find a series of counterintuitive responses, or else they'll quickly land in trouble. Right away, you are threatening their knight, and you're also controlling the key escape squares, so the knight has nowhere useful to go. In most cases, your opponents will start playing awkward or outright bad moves. One common mistake is bishop captures on g8. Some players believe this trade favors them because it prevents you from castling. And while that's technically true, it completely misses the bigger picture. The more important factor here is that white's bishop on c4 is one of the very few pieces they've developed. Giving it up early, especially for a knight that hasn't even moved yet, only weakens their overall position and leaves them vulnerable to your fast-developing attack. So, after white trades off their bishop on g8, they're left with almost no active pieces in the game. Meanwhile, your knight is still attacking, and now it has to retreat. At this point, white is completely passive, and you have a perfect setup to dominate the rest of the game. Honestly, the position is already close to resignable. Now, white might place their last bit of hope in queen to h5 check, and while you could easily prevent it, I actually recommend that you allow them to play it. Why? Because it's just another move in the wrong direction. So, instead of blocking it, you calmly continue with pawn to d5, reinforcing your center and opening lines for your pieces. Now, if they go ahead with queen to h5, which most players will, that becomes another strategic blunder. They're still ignoring development, clinging to the hope of a quick attack. They also continue to believe you're playing something unorthodox or unsound, and they want to punish it, but they're walking straight into a trap. Now you calmly respond with pawn to g6, shutting down their queen's hopes and reinforcing your kingside defense. From here, white is left without a plan, behind in development and staring down your rapidly building initiative. It turns out that your rook on the g-file is incredibly useful here. It supports your future kingside attack with great effect. For example, after a simple exchange, this rook becomes very active and starts applying pressure. Now, your opponent will likely grab your pawn, hoping to spark some kind of attack, but you calmly play queen to g5, a multi-purpose move. It not only defends your rook, but also threatens queen captures on g2, which puts pressure on white's rook on h1. At this point, white is already in serious trouble. Suppose they try to defend with pawn to g3. Now the twist is revealed. White's queen, which has wandered to h5 and wasted several moves, is actually trapped. You respond with rook to h6, and now the only move for white's queen is to capture the pawn on c7. But after that, you simply play bishop to d6, and there is no escape. The queen is lost, and your position is dominant. You've won material, grabbed the initiative, and maintained a superior setup. It's completely winning for black. Now, let's talk about the highest win rate opening for black. Another powerful counter to the Italian game, especially against attempts to launch the fried liver attack. Here you play the shameless and ruthless knight captures on e4, a move that stuns most opponents. Instead of defending your f7 pawn, you just sacrifice a knight. At first glance, this looks like total madness, but in reality, it's a highly tactical opening with many traps and quick win possibilities. I just checked the database, and out of over 1 million recorded games in this exact line, an overwhelming 98.3% of white players failed to find the correct response. That gives you a massive edge right from the start, and a real shot at winning the game within just a few moves. And so, even though there's a small chance your opponent knows the correct response, the risk is very low, and it's absolutely worth trying. So, what's the idea? The two most common moves for white here are knight captures on f7 or knight captures on e4, and both are wrong. Even if they play the best move, bishop captures on f7, they usually follow up with something inaccurate, landing in a bad position anyway. In most games, they'll go for knight captures on f7, thinking they're forking your whole army and winning instantly, but then you hit them with queen to h4, threatening queen captures on f2, which is very similar to the Traxxler counterattack we discussed earlier. From here, it's surprisingly hard for white to defend. You can easily bring your light-squared bishop into the attack, your knight can jump forward, and you take control of several key squares in white's camp. If white tries to shut things down with pawn to g3, trying to block your queen, you sacrifice your knight, and now a flood of threats appears. Their a-file rook is pinned, so they can't recapture the knight. You're also threatening their bishop, the knight on f7 is hanging, and queen to e4 check is coming. White falls apart quickly. For example, if they try to grab your rook, expecting a simple trade, you go queen to e4, checking the king. Your knight controls key escape squares, so white is helpless. Now they must block with bishop to e2, giving up the rook in the corner. Even after that, they try to save their king by giving up more pieces, but it's useless. You capture the bishop, and soon they're pushed into checkmate.